Hello to viewers tuning in to Assay TV. We're giving a pre-121 Cape Town and Mining in Indaba insight to some key themes as to what the energy transition means for Africa in this decade. And I'm catching up with an expert on Sub Saharan Africa, mining resources, the DRC, and also the China-Africa investment angle as well. It's Mr. Christian-Geraud Neema, who's an economist and a researcher based out of Mauritius. Christian-Geraud, thank you very much for chatting with me today.
Thank you, Ed, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I'm glad we got this in just before our Cape Town events next week. And as we were planning, when we were discussing doing this session, we wanted to touch on some of the key topics that are going to be driving the conversation around this metals and mining bull market, particularly around the energy transition and what it means in an African context. So I wonder if you could just start us off by considering what the global decarbonisation movement presents to African nations and mining projects within Sub-Saharan Africa.
It presents, first of all, in general for the mining industry in Africa, it presents, first of all, a challenge for moving from decarbonisation, going for a more cleaner mining approach for many countries, because we have to understand that the way we used to mine in Africa was more carbonized, and now with the decarbonisation, we have to find new approach that may come with costs, that may come with industry challenges, because we do know that the context in Africa, the industrial gap that face many countries in Africa, puts a challenge for many mining industry, because when you need to move to much cleaner approach, a much cleaner way of mining, you have to invest more in new technology, in new approach. So those investment comes in an environment where Africa has a huge, tremendous lack of infrastructure problem. So you have to fill that gap first, and that's one of the big challenge. But it also comes with opportunity, and unfortunately, in terms of opportunity, it doesn't come with to all mining countries. It comes for countries like the DRC, the Zimbabwe, those countries where Zambia, who are mining those minerals that we need for cleaner energy. For DRC, for example, you have like the cobalt and everything. So it's an opportunity to see now the country and the country is already becoming the center point of everything that's cobalt related in the world, with 65 to 70% of world reserve. It's becoming the focal point. So for those countries, there is an opportunity. Lithium, same thing. Lithium and nickel, something that you see in Zimbabwe, in DRC too, in Mali. Those countries now, they have the opportunity to seize that, to become much more valuable than they used to be before. And the more you have and the more central you become, the more important you become into that sphere. So that's where now the opportunity is for you to say, okay, now I need to change the way mining is done in my country. And we see in a country like Guinea, where they saw now with bauxite and iron, they're now trying to impose new rules to companies to say, no, you have to transform, to make the change, the transformation locally to produce aluminum in the country. So we understand now countries are moving to this approach to say, hey, we understand that we have the opportunity to seize here. We want to do things differently. We want now to leave the basic export size of the spectrum, to move up to the value chain, midstream and down the stream, to become really producer of final product of those mining industries. So of those miners. So this comes with challenges for the mining companies, and because those mining companies are facing structural challenges and problems in those countries, but it also comes with opportunities for those for those exporting countries.
Yeah, absolutely. Touched on a lot of points there, and first I wanted to go on to around some of the countries that you mentioned around Guinea, Zambia, DRC. You didn't mention South Africa, of course, and traditionally been a mining hub. It's got its own challenges around energy, coal, for instance. If you think about moving away from hydrocarbons, but then also power, inconsistency of existing power infrastructure and power supply. Do you think that the DRC has perhaps displaced South Africa as the sort of mining capital of Sub-Saharan Africa? Maybe give mineral resources at the moment, or its discovery potential, or is it's much more nuanced than that?
Yes, it's much more nuanced than that. I won't go to the place of displacing South Africa, first of all, because DRC is a close country. The region, the Katanga region, it is a close region, doesn't have access to sea, to seaport and to exit points. So it's basically, for now, for example, most of part of natural resource coming from DRC goes for Durban port. Although we have now many corridors opening up, Lobito and in the eastern seaboard with the Mombasa port, and we see with Walvis Bay, we see a lot of initiatives taking place. But in terms of displacing South Africa, not yet. And first of all, because the industrial gap between the DRC and the South Africa, it's huge. South Africa has, despite the electrical issue they have now, power supply they have now and everything, they're still much ahead than DRC. DRC has the potential, but DRC has a governance issue, structural issue, infrastructure issue, that makes it difficult to say today that DRC is going to displace South Africa in that being the hub. Although the fact that DRC is attracting main mining companies today in terms of cobalt, copper, and everything, it's early to say that the DRC is able to displace South Africa. Of course, South Africa still has potential that we cannot just discard. Those potential need to be taken into account. And if they come if they succeed to overcome the challenge of power supply, there will still remain an important part of the mining hub into Africa. So instead of seeing them in terms of rivalries, when you look how DRC depends on South Africa, I see both of them as a complementary forces, because in the longer run, DRC will still need those coastal countries, South Africa, Durban port and everything, to export. And of course, if DRC doesn't change in policy and move ahead in the value chain of mining industry, but still even there, DRC is still going to need South Africa. So instead of seeing them rivals, I see them like complementary forces, because we also see, we're talking about the power supply problem in South Africa. South Africa, in terms of President Zuma, he signed some contract with DRC with Inga 3 project to supply power into South Africa, because they knew they need that power supply into the industry. So instead of seeing them rivals, I see them more complementary countries that can work together to boost the mining industry, not only on the Southern Africa itself, but on the whole Africa in general.
Yep, absolutely. What can you tell our viewers about some of the changes going on within the DRC in terms of governance of mining as well? You mentioned some examples sort of from Guinea, looking at localizing the midstream and downstream elements and becoming perhaps a little bit more internalized rather than pure export led.
No, exactly.
Is DRC going in a similar direction at the moment? Do you have any updates there, sort of from the sort of policy?
There are a lot of signs. There are a lot of signs that shows that DRC is slowly and steadily moving into that direction. We saw that for the last news was the joint agreement they signed with Zambia last week, when they say, okay, we're gonna try to create a hub of EV batteries into the region, because Zambia and DRC, they constitute the 90%, 100% of the copper belt. So they understand that there is a potential there. So DRC has been expressing that since last year, 2021, November, December, they've been expressing we'd like to have more transformation on the ground. We'd like to see more things happening. We see that already Chinese being investing in smelters in the country, but that's still not enough. The DRC wants more, especially now they understand the value that the cobalt and the place in the cobalt industry. It's rightfully, it's normal for them to say, hey, we want to move up ahead into the value chain, into the midstream and downstream, to be able to produce now EV batteries, to have those industry in the place. But going from what you want to get what you have, there's still that gap of infrastructure. That's the big problem that the DRC is facing, infrastructure problem, road, electricity supply. The Busanga Dam that has been built by the Chinese is it going to be able to fill all the need of the mining industry in the country, in the Katanga region? We still hope to see that change. But when you add up some new elements of transformation and industrial processing and everything, we still need to know the know-how, the manpower, the infrastructure. All those issues, they don't just come because you sign a decree. They just don't come because you say something. They come because you put in place policies that allows you to have all those components in places. So when we look at the agreement they signed with Zambia, Zambia has more smelters and processing treatment than DRC. It's been a bit ahead of DRC. And Zambia has, despite its problem, has a much more mining stable environment than the DRC. The DRC, let's not forget, a lot of corruption, it's a lot of political instability. It's all those issues that when you remove all the infrastructure problem, the governance issue itself, the politicization of the mining industry to DRC makes it for any mining companies, you being Glencore, you being China Moly, you being Zhejiang, with all the willingness you might have, you're still gonna face those politicization of the process in the DRC that makes it even more challenging than the infrastructure problem that you face.
Yep, interesting. Yeah. You mentioned the Chinese input and activity, particularly around infrastructure. Yeah. But what about, can you comment on the Chinese activity around acquisitions of mines and mining projects as well?
Oh,
obviously,
yeah.
They're linked, but there seems to be an uptrend, of course, with Chinese state-initiated firms acquiring brown sites or new mines on the continent.
Yes, exactly. Chinese have been really active, quote unquote, aggressively active into acquiring new mining projects in Zimbabwe, where you see that with lithium and nickel. They don't shy away from partnership with Western companies. This is where the narrative of West versus China in the mining industry is kind of shaky, because you will see that how much Chinese companies are willing to partner with the Australian companies in Zimbabwe with in different lithium projects in Zimbabwe, into the DRC, and even in Mali. We see those trends, and we see that Chinese seems to have a much more clear strategy in the way they approach those mining, and that's really somehow funny to see, because when you look at the political narrative into the West, the way they are worried how China is controlling the supply chain of the strategic minerals, and you look at Western mining companies, the way they behave toward Chinese investment and partner, you're like, mining companies and Western mining companies and political leaders seems to fly into different patterns in different ways. They see different things differently. Right. And one of the last example is still in DRC. There is the lithium project in Manono with AVZ, the Australian AVZ. When you look at AVZ structure, you see that AVZ has a lot of Chinese stakeholders. The majority of them are Chinese shareholders, even though the company is listed in Australia. A lot of them are Chinese shareholders, but beside AVZ itself, AVZ has partners with China KTL, they received 400 million in February from KTL, who acquired 24% of what might become one of the biggest lithium projects in the world. So you see that there is this coordination of Chinese company, Digit Mining, China Moly, Zhejiang. Those are the big head of Chinese company. They're spreading them in Africa and even in the global south, in Indonesia and in Argentina. We see them, those are the big companies are moving ahead.
Excellent. Yeah, it's interesting. What about renewables projects within Africa and the continent? Do you have any view on not just the supply of the materials for greening the world, but actually renewable energy sources, for instance? We know about a great deal, going on in Morocco. There's hydropower projects by Andrew Forrest, Australia's mining mogul. Do you have any comments on that?
The renewable energy is still an opportunity that we need to seize, and with the decarbonization that we are seeing a lot. It's opened doors for many opportunities in terms of investment. In South Africa, for instance, the the special economic zone they wanted to put in Limpopo, it was first built around the coal power plant, the coal field power plant. But with the pressure, they decided to move away from that coal power plant, and now they're going to the renewable. And this is where you see the Chinese were investing in that project. I say, okay, we're gonna move for a much more photovoltaic project where with solar panel central. That's gonna they go from 3.5 gigawatts to 1 gigawatts project. So, but there is still those opportunities, but the challenge in that sector still remains somehow the legislation in many countries, because the legislation in many countries are still slow to keep up the pace to create an environment for those investments to come and take places. Because in those different places, you're gonna have to privatize the sector. You're gonna have to privatize production, transformation, distribution, management. So you have, and all those segments needs to have less politicization, but more business acumen into dealing with that. So many countries, there are opportunities, and countries like South Africa and the Maghreb, and the MENA country, Morocco, you mentioned Morocco, Egypt, those countries have more opportunities because the governance itself is already there, and the industrial base is already there. But in Sub-Saharan Africa, the challenges still remain quite high, but the opportunities are there.
Are there any nations or jurisdictions that are really doing it right in terms of balancing the political bureaucratic controls with the business acumen that you mentioned, particularly in terms of natural resources?
Well, we're gonna mention the good. If you have to mention the good kid of this class, we're gonna mention Botswana. You cannot mention good governance in mining industry in Africa without mentioning Botswana. And it's really there where you see the effort is being made to really create an environment where businesses and states are working together to create development. I would have mentioned a country like Rwanda, but the issue when it comes to its intervention into the DRC, the smuggling of natural resources, makes it a bit difficult to balance how Rwanda can be labeled as a good kid when it comes to natural resource management and governance. We see effort has been being made in countries like Ghana, where Ghana is trying to push legislation where we try to see some changes in that. But in overall, we still have some big issue in those big mining countries, big natural resource countries like Angola, Nigeria, DRC, Zambia. We still have that governance issue that needs to be addressed.
Yep, certainly. But thinking about regions in sort of West Africa seems to be the outlier gold at the moment. Certainly gold exploration stories from everything from Endeavour to a whole host of companies now. And that, albeit that's specific to the gold sector, but it's a great example of how regionally successes can be made
exactly
through the geology.
Yeah. So West Africa remains that region where you see a lot of opportunities there with the gold, gold industry in West Africa, Ghana, Mali,
So Christian, what are you working on now? You work on a host of projects. You're sort of advising various corporates. Are there any exciting projects that you're on at the moment, or things for you coming up?
Oh, for me right now, I'm more focused on everything related to China in Africa. We are covering everything that China is doing in Africa in terms of investment, in terms of politics and natural resources and everything basically what China is doing in Africa. Right now, my main project, I'm working with the China Africa project, where I'm a Francophone editor. I'm covering China and Africa in French because we noticed that when it comes to China Africa discourse, there's not a lot of French coverage, so we are providing that Francophone coverage into Africa, so people can know more about the space when it comes to China and Africa. I'm still working and I'm still working with different small mining business here and there, giving advice, giving more, because we are more into the geopolitical of those natural resources to see how big players are moving around, especially the Chinese, how they're moving around, not only in Africa but in the global south, especially in region like Latin America, in Argentina, in Brazil, and Indonesia. So yeah, this is what I'm working on right now, and those projects I'm working on now.
Yeah. And do you have any overall insight or final point around the Chinese activity? I know we touched on it, but in terms of what might be a new trend or something that's maybe a bit more interesting, obviously China looks to bring a lot of resource globally back to China for its processing of natural resources. But is there anything? Is there an additional player there?
There is a new trend to look for. China is changing. I think many of our audience already know that economically speaking, China has been changing a lot. They've been pushing environmental laws, putting a lot of pressure on all processing industries, being cobalt, being aluminum, being bauxite, iron, and everything. They've been receiving a lot of environmental pressure, pushing those processing plants in a certain, they're still in the downstream of the supply, on the upstream of the, but they're still now outsourcing them. This is the first trend, the change that's happening inside the Chinese economy, inside of the Chinese mining industry itself. The environmental changes, the political changes, the economic changes. And second level of changes that we see is the stance that the producing countries are taking. We have Indonesia close to China that says that no, now processing is going to happen locally. It's going to happen in Indonesia. You go in Africa where China might say, okay, I'm going to leverage my supply from Indonesia from the bauxite in Guinea. The same thing happening there. Say, no, now it's time for processing it in the country. And in DRC, the same language is happening. Now you understand, and even Zimbabwe, they're now moving in that direction. So now the question will be for China. It doesn't really make sense when you have the main sources country that say, we want more processing here. We are not kicking you out. We just want you to invest more here. And plus, in your own countries, things are changing. Cost of productions are raising. Environmental costs are raising over there. So it doesn't make sense to still want to process over there. But now the challenge the China is facing now with the slow economic growth they've been facing. Xi Jinping recently said that we're gonna push back into infrastructure to boost the economy. The question will be for China now how they will push for more infrastructure projects, attract those natural resources, those raw natural resources or semi processed natural resources, when in the same time the producing countries are telling you the time to export raw material is over. We want now processing being done locally. So those are the challenges that China has to face. Those are the things that we need to look at, how China is going to move in that direction, how it's going to move. And I do believe, personally, me following China, I do believe that they don't mind processing locally as long as the political environment and economic conditions are met on the ground to say, we can do it. So when you can do it, yes, you can do it, because it doesn't serve that much to require for a company to invest 300, 500, 600 million into processing plant when in the same time it's under pressure of a political pressure, corruption and everything. It just raises the cost for itself to invest in the country. So yeah, excellent, fascinating stuff. Very good. All right, Christian, thanks very much for sharing your insights there. It sets us with a nice. Thank you, Adam, for having me. Yeah, indeed. Thank you for speaking for SA TV. Thank you very much.